On the night of February 8, 2015, there was a disciplinary court of love for my friend John Dehlin, the founder of the Mormon Stories podcast and outspoken advocate for gay rights, same-sex marriage, and the ordained women movement. Because of his public doubts, unorthodox views on the LDS Church, and equal rights advocacy, the church charged John with conduct contrary to the laws and orders of the church. While the disciplinary council met with John inside his local stake center, a number of friends and supporters of John held a candlelight vigil outside while we waited to hear the results of the council. I asked some of these good people what John and his work had meant to them.
I think that John Dehlin creates a safe place where people can truly be honest, where people can talk about their fears and their hopes, their heartaches, what is working for them in the Mormon Church and what is not. I think that what's really lacking in the LDS faith today is a place where people can question without fear of being ostracized, of being disciplined, where they can truly be themselves and be authentic and say, you know, this works for me, this part I like, this part does not work for me. Is there still a place for me? And John Dehlin creates that space. But by them kicking John Dehlin out, what does that mean for people and the space for them? Does that mean that there is place for those that question, that are honest, they're authentic, those that believe in equal rights for everyone, but still feel part of the culture of Mormonism? Because I think this is more than just our religion. It's a part of us. It's a part of our culture, of our people, how we were raised, our ethnicity. It's a food, it's music, it's the way we relate to one another, it's family. And by us saying, well, because you support and love everyone equally, you can't be part of our group, is really damaging to those of us who are trying to strike that balance.
To me, John Dehlin has represented a safe place. Since I live here in Logan with him, I would see him come into my work, and as soon as I saw him, I knew that he got me. When I was leaving Mormonism, when I was trying to figure out what to do with my life, I would see John, and I would go up to him, and he'd ask me how I was doing. He would tell me, you know, don't give up, and things like that. And so John Dehlin to me will represent, and represents to me, safety for people that don't toe the line in Mormonism.
Well, I guess John Dehlin, to me, created a community where I felt I belonged, and I could be true to myself and honest, and met other people that are like me, maybe a little questioning. I question everything. It's part of being Mike.
Sure. So John Dehlin is a very dear friend of mine. I was already pretty much outside of the church by the time that I met John. I went through my own faith journey without having a community around to support me. Pretty much it was just my own exploration, and like Micah said earlier, my friend Google, there wasn't Mormon Stories, and that was a really lonely, really hard time for me. I felt like my world was caving in around me and I was completely alone, and I felt like everything about me was wrong, and I met John years later after that on the other side of it, just in our doctoral program, and learned about his podcast just through the faculty mentioning, oh, we're bringing this guy in who does this podcast, have you heard of it? And I hadn't heard of it, but I found John to be an incredible support person to me. My personal things that I've needed his support from aren't really so much about the church, because I was already mostly resolved with that. But he's a friend regardless of what walk in life you come from, regardless of what your views are, your personality, your identities, how different you are from him. He and I couldn't be more different from one another in a lot of ways, but he is one of my dearest friends, and I love and respect him for what he does. sometimes I've had a hard time understanding how he can be so tolerant and so soft and so gentle and loving in his approach. But it's not hard to understand that when you get to know John, because that's just the nature of his personality. And so for me, he's a friend, but I also look at what other people see in John, and I've had the opportunity to meet people, along the way here in Logan who've known John a different way and known his more like public persona just from the podcast. And I've heard story after story after story about the way that he has reached out and been there for people who he didn't know. He didn't have any obligation to reach out and support, but they heard his podcast, they had questions, they had pain, and they wanted somebody to talk to, and he's walked them through that. And I have a lot of respect for him, and that's why I'm here tonight. The podcast didn't serve the same role in my life, but I know the role that it's served in other people's lives, and John certainly serves that role in mine. So just here to say I love you, John, love your family, here for you guys, and in solidarity.
So I found Mormon Stories right when I was really starting to have a lot of questions, and I was searching for anyone to talk to, anyone to, help me navigate, some of the tougher aspects of church history. And I was coming up short. Couldn't find anyone, my bishop, my stake president, my parents, who I've always turned to. Nobody seemed like they wanted to talk to me about any of the things I was learning or I had questions about. And I stumbled upon Mormon Stories, and it really just was a lifeline to me that not only were there other people out there that had the same questions, but there were people that were willing to discuss them openly and not, just give vague, faith-affirming answers because they were afraid of saying something against the church, but, just being able to have an open and honest discussion. And that really meant everything to me at the time. And so I drive a lot, and I just devoured so many of the episodes. And then I was able to find some of the communities that he had started, and actually being able to go and meet like-minded people and have some face-to-face support was another great blessing. So it's sad that we had to go outside of the church to find that we couldn't find that community or that support, or ask those questions in a church setting. But I'm thankful that for the work John's done in setting up these groups, and it's been a great thing for me.
As I mentioned in my Mormon Stories interview with John Dehlin, during my faith crisis, his work in Mormon Stories was it provided that the soft landing that took away a lot of the anger and frustration that I had with the church, and made me a little bit more kinder, more understanding, more empathetic towards the church and members in general. So his work has been very invaluable to me to basically decrease the faith crisis that I had, and to help me move forward.
Hi, my name's Perry Porter, and I've known John for over 10 years. I don't remember exactly how long I've known him. I've known him in his connection to Sunstone initially, and then through his podcasts later. My son, when he was having a faith crisis of his own, reached out to John very early on about the podcast with kiddie baptisms, a little bit beyond infant, I guess. And he was helpful for my son to help him get a perspective on that at that point in time. And so I appreciate John.
I've had the privilege of working with John and working for his organization, and also being a friend of his. And if it wasn't for guys like John Dehlin, I don't know where I'd be right now. experiencing a crisis of faith in Mormonism isn't just about your faith. It's about your whole identity is wrapped up in it, you know. And you know, I don't, you know, it's always fascinating for me to meet people that went through their faith transition before the internet, just because I just don't understand how they did it. But you know, guys like John, you know, gave me a community, really. You know, they gave me people. He gave me people, and without those people, I don't know if I would have survived the transition. You know, so that's what John Dehlin means to me. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I was introduced to John Dehlin by an LGBT friend of mine when I was still in the church, and who I would talk with and try to help stay in the church. This friend of mine pushed me to watch the Benji Schwimmer segments in Mormon Stories, and so that was my introduction to Mormon Stories. Absolutely fabulous. Changed my mindset immediately, and instead of trying to change people, I started supporting people. Life happens, and through studies of church history and other things, I find different ways to live that feel more Christ-like to me. And then working at Utah State University with John Dehlin, he offered some faith transitions workshops, and that's where I was able to meet John in person. And so John helps so many people. People I don't even think he knows that he helps, who through first, second, third party help me help others.
John Dehlin was my landing place to keep me sane when I first started learning about some of the historical and doctrinal issues of the church. And I felt alone, I felt confused. I remember Googling disaffected Mormon, thinking I'd created the term, and I thought, I think I'm disaffected. So I Googled it, and I found some websites, and then I found the Mormon Stories podcast. And just being able to listen to that and realize there were other people who felt the same as me, and I wasn't like crazy or anything, saved me. It really helped me a lot.
John Dehlin for me was a non-judgmental friend when I felt like I had no friends. He was a lifeline when I thought I had no connections to anything that wasn't part of the church. So I really appreciate that he was there, and he's been there for so many thousands of people that he's really left a legacy in that regard.
Primarily it's me. I'm the one that found John Dehlin, and for me, he was a safe haven. And you even listen to him speak tonight. He is a respectful, considerate, the way he involves in the issues, it made me so I realized I wasn't crazy. I really appreciated that he allowed me to think and know that it was okay and a safe place to be.
Yeah. Well, the thing I really love about John Dehlin's work is that he's given voice to a lot of different kinds of people, and that he will sit and talk to a person for a long time and let them talk on his podcast and just really let them tell their story. And for me, that's what being Christ-like should be like. We should hear each other and not be afraid of what another person has to say or edit them. And so I really love that about John's work.
Voice to the voiceless, I think, in some ways. And just watching his work over this whole time, seeing his sense of social justice kind of grow, and his understanding of the pain people are going through, and his deep desire to help people who are suffering, I think is remarkable. So we're glad to know him.
I then asked them what they hoped would be the end result of the action the church was taking against John.
I most of all would like to see John Dehlin and Margie walking away from this confident that they made the right choices, that they did what was right and let the consequences follow, and that they are still treated well and embraced in their community, that their children still have friends and a social life, that they're not ostracized, that they know within their hearts that there are people like us who love them and care about them, regardless of what the decision is tonight, that's not a reflection of them, because they acted with integrity, and those of us on the outside really admire that.
What I would like to see happen is that while they're in there, they realize that kicking John Dehlin out or excommunicating him or disfellowshipping him is the wrong decision, and that they will give him a hug and tell him, we want you here. We welcome you and other people like you in our religion. I don't think that's going to happen, but that is what I would like them to do, and I would like to see.
Right, so you're hopeful for a positive change.
I am hopeful for a positive change. I don't think it's going to happen. I know it's not going to happen, but I would love for that to happen, because then it would give hope for all these people that are here at the vigil right now that Mormonism does want them to stay.
So, I don't know what I hope happens tonight, but I hope it gets people to recognize John and the things that he's done and the honest approach that he's taken.
Call the courageous approach.
The courageous approach. I'm an engineer. I deal with things. When I look at only part of the data, things break and people die. So I have to look at all the data. And why shouldn't we do the same here?
I am not at all invested in the outcome of what the church decides to do about John. I'm not sure what John's investment in that outcome is. I'm only invested in him as a person and his growth and the growth of his wife and children also. And the only outcome I hope for is that they find peace and that they actually maintain peace. I think they've found peace, but maintain peace and that they're happy whatever happens.
Oh, I don't know. That's a tough one. I think they've already made up their minds. I think he's going to be excommunicated. I've already resigned, and so it's not going to affect me, but I know there's a lot of people that feel like they're on the bubble, and to them, getting rid of somebody like John, who has the balls to go out and talk openly and question, support equal rights, support ordained women. There's so many people that are in that same situation that are going to, I'm afraid, have this feeling that, if there's not room for John, there's not room for me. And I think it's going to cause a lot of pain for people, and that makes me sad.
Well, you have kind of you have the church that they want to do what they want to do, and you have John and what he wants to do, and it may not necessarily be the same thing. I think what I would like to happen tonight would be a better understanding from the public that there are real issues, that John is not making up stuff or going against the church. He's trying to provide a way for members that are troubled with these issues, who are having doubts, to be able to process it and to be able to understand what is going on and how they can make Mormonism work for themselves. So I hope that there will be more exposure, more understanding among members that we're in a new time right now, where with the church's essays and its facts, we have to figure out a way to process it, and John Dehlin has really tried to provide that platform for people to be able to process the troubling information.
And I'm hoping that today that the outcome is one that he'll feel good about 5 years from now, and that whatever is going on now and how things change, that he won't look back and try and second guess. It's hard to second guess and go back and say, I should have said this during the church quarter, I should have said that, and you don't really have any control over, your mind's racing at the moment, and you think of things you should have said or could have said better or different back then, and so I just hope that he has a clear mind and that he can put his position out there, what he thinks is the best thing for him and the best thing for the long term for the church. And that's what I hope for him, that it just goes well for him, because he's a good guy.
Well, in terms of what happens with John's disciplinary council, my opinion is that John's gonna win no matter what, and the church loses no matter what. Early on, when I was interacting with the online Mormon community and when I was a believer, I would tell people who left the church that I want to see them at church, and but I didn't want to see them at church for their sake. I wanted to see them at church for my sake and for the church's sake, because the church is a worse off place without people like John Dehlin, and without the people that the church seems to be trying to marginalize and purge right now. And so I think John will be fine no matter what. He's got a good head on his shoulders, and he's got an entire community supporting him. So I'm sure that John will be just fine. So in terms of John, I don't really have a preference of what happens. But the part of me that worries about the church and its future, I see much more problems depending on what happens. I hope they let him stay, but I don't think that's going to happen.
Honestly, I hope that there is closure, and unfortunately that will likely mean excommunication. I fear that if they drag it on or do something lesser than excommunication, John will be dragged and his family will be dragged through this again in future leadership changes or in future years. And so I'm hoping this will be a conclusion and a beginning so that he can continue his work.
I want for John what John wants, and I think that that's the place everybody in the church should be allowed to be, is to be able to be honest and authentic, and to recognize the issues for what they are, and still be safe within the church if that's what you want to be, and not be ostracized if you decide not to be a part of the church.
This might differ than what other people have responded. I would like to see John excommunicated, and the reason for that is I think it would be the best thing for him and the worst thing for the church.
And I think, for the outcome, one of my favorite quotations, I can't quote it specifically, was Brigham Young, who said that the most dangerous thing for the church was people not to question. And, for the outcome, I would love for the church to mature, as it has at different times in the past, and to allow people to believe in their hearts, but to think on their own. But I doubt that's going to happen, just from precedent. But that's the optimistic outcome.
I would like for John to feel satisfied with whatever happens in the end, whatever the end of the story is. I think I don't really have a desire for the court to go one way or the other. I have a desire for John to feel like he has what he needs to be happy and whole with he and his wife and his children. I don't know if you have.
Well, if I were to have a desire for how the court would turn out, I think that I would want him to just be let off, like for there to be no charges or any sort of discipline, because I think that would signal a very different day in the church where people could have their own voice and they could express their own concerns. And I think that if there was open dialogue and that was allowed, that the church could become a much better place than it is right now. But I don't anticipate that.
I gotta say, that's a good vision. Like, if they would shake his hand and say, John, thank you for taking care of the people we abandoned. That would be a good outcome.
After 3.5 hours, a spokesman for the church came out and addressed the crowd. He informed us that a decision had been reached.
I just met with President King, and the proceedings have concluded. President King indicated that a decision will be announced to Brother Dehlin in the coming days. He's going to submit the matter to prayer and further consideration.
John, with his lovely wife Margie by his side, then addressed the crowd.
I also want to say that I'm deeply grateful to the LDS Church for the upbringing that they afforded me. From primary to scout camp, to church dances, to youth conferences, to temple trips, to dance festivals and road shows. For at least 19 years, I believed that I lived the Mormon dream. And for me at that time, that dream was spectacularly beautiful. Then some cracks began to form in the foundation. The LDS Church is an inextricable part of who I have become, as a husband, as a father, and as a human being. And I only have words and feelings of gratitude for how Mormonism has shaped me and provided me with community and support over the years. The cracks in my Orthodox foundation began with some very troubling mission experiences in Guatemala. The cracks continued while experiencing all of the academic freedom issues at BYU and the crackdown on progressive professors. 1993 was a huge year for me and my family. It is the year that I met and married my brilliant and devoted sweetheart, Margie. It is the year I graduated from BYU, and it is the year of the September 6 excommunications. It was in 1993 when my big, beautiful Mormon dream came crashing down upon me. I was able to place my church membership on life support for about 10 more years after 1993, putting it on slow burn. We had 4 children during that time. I was able to find a career and save some money. Serving as a seminary teacher in 2001, I remember learning for the first time as I came out of the seminary building that a plane had flown into the Twin Towers. I remember feeling that life was very precious, that truth mattered, that bigotry and exclusivity and fundamentalism can cost lives. By 2003, I knew that I had to do something. We began looking into graduate programs, and in 2004 we made the crazy decision to leave behind a 6-figure salary career and move to Cache Valley. After a year of connecting with the good folks at Sunstone and Dialogue, I remember very distinctly 10 years ago sitting at my computer in the basement of the house right across that field, trying to decide what to name a podcast that I wanted to start. Some of the names that I threw around were Mormon Truth Podcast, Mormon Evidence Podcast, Mormon History Podcast, and I believe that athoughtfulfaith.com was the first domain name that I grabbed. But I settled on the name Mormon Stories because I had come to believe in the power of stories. Before we tell our stories, we sit alone in darkness, suffering, thinking we are the only ones, thinking we are crazy, feeling broken. But there is power in story. In telling our stories, we decide to come out of the darkness, to come out of our closets. In telling our stories, we begin the journey of discovering and revealing our authentic selves. It's a lifelong endeavor because our stories don't end with their original storytelling. But the journey of authenticity and self-discovery and self-empowerment often begins with the telling of our story. In telling our stories and in listening to stories of others, we learn new information, new approaches, new perspectives. Knowledge is power, mostly because it helps us to stand on solid ground and to see life more clearly. Knowledge lights the way to brighter days. In telling our stories and in listening to the stories of others, we form a community.
On Tuesday, February the 10th, John announced the content of this letter publicly. He had been excommunicated by a unanimous decision. According to his stake president, he was guilty of apostasy, which was not the original charge, specifically for his teachings that disputed the nature of Heavenly Father and the divinity of Jesus Christ, his statement that the Book of Mormon and Book of Abraham are fraudulent and works of fiction, and his teaching and statements that reject the LDS Church as being the true church with power and authority from God. The letter further stated that I want you to know that these actions were not taken against you because you have doubts or that you were asking questions. This decision was reached because of your categorical statements opposing the doctrine of the church and their wide dissemination via your internet presence, which has led others away from the church. Which I took to mean that you can have questions and doubts and support social movements that are contrary to the policies of the church, just as long as you don't do it openly or advocate for those positions publicly. John, I want to tell you that your stake president was wrong. You didn't lead anybody out of the church. In fact, you never even left the church. They kicked you out. What caused people to leave the church was the problems that they found on their own. The problems that the church tried to hide, cover up, or ignore for years on end. What you did was you faced those problems head on, courageously, boldly, nobly, independently even, trying to find answers, whether they be faith promoting or not. What you did was allowed people to have validation to their questions, validation to their searching for truth. That's what you did. You did that for me, and you did that for all these people that I interviewed. When I had the shelf on the back of my mind break under the weight of all the questions that I was running into, I didn't have anybody to go to until I went online and found places like Mormon Stories and the other forums. There I found other people who had the same questions that I did. I thought I was crazy. I thought nobody else had these questions, that there was something wrong with me. And finding this community of people who had the same questions that I did made me feel like I was okay, that I wasn't crazy, that I had valid concerns and valid reasons for doubting certain aspects of the church and things that I had been raised to believe. I'm sorry you've been excommunicated. I'm very sorry that there's no place in the church for people like you or me or any of these good people that I talk to. The truth matters to us. The truth is important to us, and community is important to us. Doing good to others is important to us. And it's a shame that the church, because we didn't come to the answers that we were supposed to come to, can't embrace us and doesn't want us to be a part of that, because we have a lot to offer that community and that organization, and they won't have us. Maybe someday, but it probably won't be in our lifetimes. I want to thank you, John. You helped me in my life. You met with me and my now ex-wife several times when we were having issues. We went to lunch several times. You helped form the local community that I'm a part of, and we're both still a part of. And I hope that the next time we have a barbecue or a pie night or a get-together, that you'll feel welcome and actually come and feel the love and support that you've given us, and hopefully we can give that back to you.